Welcome back to the Gen 20 podcast. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Marina. And today we're talking with Michelle Douglas, author of Don't Wear Shoes You Can't Walk In, A Field Guide for Your 20s. Michelle, it's so nice to meet you and have you on the pod. We're really excited to talk to you about this book you've been writing. What is the background of this project? Like, how did you get started?
Hi, guys. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm just really excited to be here. And I feel like anytime I listen to you guys, I'm always thinking that we have such similar thoughts, or like I find myself nodding along. So I'm just happy to be here. And I hope that maybe some listener finds themselves nodding along. But thanks for asking about the background of the book project. That feels like a really good place to start. So the origin of Don't Wear Shoes You Can't Walk In dates all the way back to 2010. And I think maybe I'm going to age myself immediately, that I'm out of my 20s. In 2010, I had just moved to Atlanta, Georgia for my first job out of college. And it was just a time in my life where I was learning so many new things and experiencing so many firsts. And I know you guys can both relate to this, but I was in a new city and I was at my first career job. It was my first apartment on my own, like my first time navigating work relationships, and even my first time buying like a mattress and a couch, really big new experiences. And it was just a really exciting and memorable time in my life. And I constantly found myself like feeling these two really big things. The first was that this was a time in my life that I was really going to want to remember. And the second was that I kept wishing that I like had a guide, someone who had been like where I was. I mentioned the mattress, like buying a first mattress, and it's like, it would have been nice to share the experience with someone of actually like going to a furniture store and trying to figure out what kind of mattress you like, while also awkwardly talking to a salesperson while you like lay on mattresses. Or, like finding someone who could help me like relate to this constant need I had to achieve or like feel fulfilled by my work. So really, I wished that there was someone who could understand what I was experiencing, or maybe even tell me what might come next. And so that year I like started journaling, and it was in part to record what I was learning so I could remember it. But it was also in part that hopefully I could be that guide for someone else. And so that year I challenged myself to write down one new thing that I learned every day. And that's actually a practice that I've kept up every year since. And I was always writing, like for someone else, but really just with this idea that maybe one day I would have a child who would benefit from my journals, or maybe someone else would pick them up. And it wasn't until more recently that it occurred to me, why wait until I have a grown adult child to share this information when there's actually so many other people who could benefit from it now? And so in I think 2018 or 19, I had left my corporate job and was starting my own business. And starting my own business had also made some space for me to work on this book project. It was just something that had been on my heart for a little while. And so I started working more seriously towards organizing the content of these journals around similar things. I realized that there were a lot of lessons about work and a lot of lessons about personal growth and, practical adult life, and that I could actually make this into a compartmentalized book. And so I think that's where, a couple years ago is where it really started to become more of a book project and less of a hobby or journaling practice of mine. And I think when I started it, I thought it would just be this kind of small gift book of quotes or lessons that I had learned. And as I worked on it, it really evolved into this tool and companion for 20-somethings that it shares the learnings from my life, but it really is a field guide, as I've called it. And it, kind of allows the reader to take note of their own life experiences.
And now a word from our sponsors. Do you hate your job? Do you feel like everyone around you has their career together and you're stuck in another soul-sucking job for what feels like 100th time? Are you asking yourself why it's so hard to find work that makes you happy? I want to tell you about my friend Serena and her program, Get Me Out of This Job. She's a career coach, and her program, Get Me Out of This Job, helps you find confidence and clarity in the next steps of your career. Serena helps you build a career around your life instead of you feeling like you have to build your life around your career. And I did her program, and it was life-changing. Before I worked with her, I worked 9 to 5 jobs and just was so miserable. I couldn't figure out why I was so unhappy. I went from job to job. And then after I worked with her, I became an entrepreneur, a writer, an author, a podcaster, and just gave me so much clarity, life-changing. So the best part is mention Gen20 and you get 10% off your coaching package. Head to getmeoutofThisJob.co to learn more or follow her on Instagram at getmeoutofThisJob.
Yeah, even just like reading through the book, I loved it. Like how you said you were like nodding along when you listened to us. Like I was nodding along as I was reading the book because I feel like it's like kind of like a big sister kind of situation, right? Like you're walking people who are kind of like following right behind you, like in like through these things, like what you were looking for.
Yeah, and I love that. Thank you. I'm a youngest child, so I like would love to be everyone's big sister. But I just love that. I think like I said, I was kind of always writing for someone else, and it's just really great to now think of it as like being in service of others and kind of being able to show someone else where I've been.
Yeah, I love that, especially because like when you like start your 20s, it really is so confusing because you kind of go from being like a baby to being an adult, really. You know, like you have to start taking control of everything that is in your life and just navigating all of these really difficult situations like all at once, basically.
Yeah, it's so much life changed so fast. And I think about that period of my life all the time. And I think in part because there's so many new and memorable experiences, but also because so many really important things happened to me. And like you said, you take on a lot of responsibility and it kind of starts to shape who you really are from there. I think before the 20s, we don't really have a whole lot of idea, or we have some idea, but we just don't know it yet. There's a lot ahead.
Yeah. I think especially in your early 20s, you go through this like, it's like a really condensed period of growth, right? Like, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was a teenager, I felt just like more confident of myself, I guess, probably because I'm like ending the baby phase of my life, right? So I was like, yeah, I know how to do all these things that I know how to do. And then like I went to college and I was like, maybe I don't know how to do all these things I know how to do. And then you're pushed through all these like different career path options and like do this, do that, you know, and like, I mean, going to college, graduating from college, all that stuff. And then you're like, it's just a very confusing time. I'm like waving my hands through the air. It's confusing.
It is. And I feel like now the 20-somethings who are in their early 20s have a lot more visual access with social media and TikTok and all of the things that maybe we didn't have. So I was just looking at my friends who were doing similar things and I was like, well, have they figured it out? Like are they doing it? And I have older brothers and they were in such a different realm of their careers and lives that the comparison was just like, oh, I must be really behind because like I was trying to be in a creative field. They were engineers. And I was like, well, they're doing these things. And so it's your field guide is so helpful. I was also nodding along as I read because I was just like, yeah, I've had similar experiences. And your title chapter, Don't Wear Shoes You Can't Walk In, made me laugh out loud because I had a personal experience like that where I was probably a junior in college going to an interview for a summer internship and I wore like a little business suit, kind of gray, appropriate for the corporate office, and nude heels. And they were slightly too big. And I walked out of it, like out of one of the shoes as I was trailing behind my interviewer to walk to his office for the interview. And I just kind of like stumbled and was like, oops. And I remember feeling so cringy in that moment because I was like, oh my gosh, you're a 21-year-old who can't even walk in high heels. And they're going to think you look ridiculous. And it's like, it's really good advice. Make sure you can walk in those shoes. Like, make sure you can carry yourself.
You just made me laugh so much because what's really beautiful about that is that means that we all have some version of that exact same story, right? And you think in that moment that you feel cringy, that it's just you, but it's not. Like we each have that experience, whether the shoes were the exact same shoes, if they were too high or too big or too small, like in some way, shape, or form, everyone has that story. And I think, when I started writing this, I questioned myself a lot of like, who am I? Why do people care what I've learned? And I think I worked with an editor who really challenged me to include how I learned the lessons. I think I said this before, like at first I just kind of imagined sharing these quotes or sharing these lessons. And, this editor said to me, if you really want people to learn, like if your goal is to teach them how to pay attention and teach them to learn, then you have to tell them how you learned these lessons. And so I think it feels a little bit more vulnerable sometimes to share the personal story behind it. But I think it's so important and it makes it so relatable. Like I'm not some famous person, but I'm someone who most likely has an experience just like you or something that you could relate to. And so I hope that makes it all the more meaningful and impactful.
Yeah, I think so. I think it like really helps to normalize the things people are going through because it's kind of like a light bulb moment almost where you're like, oh yeah, that was not just me. That was probably everyone my age.
And Marina, I think I wrote this in the book that I've actually learned the don't wear shoes you can't walk in lesson more than one time. But what's really funny to me is that experience you described was also something like in addition to my own experience, I watched someone on a college campus going to like a career fair or an interview that sounded exactly like what you just outlined.
Yeah. The best part is that I wore those shoes many more times and had similar experiences. I wore them too. I was in the first wedding I was ever in. I wore them and had to run around in the July heat, and it was so hot. And in all the and we had T-length, like knee length bridesmaids dresses. And in all the photos, my ankle and feet and shin are so red because my feet were I was in so much pain. They were so swollen and irritated. I'm just like, why did I wear these shoes again?
Some lessons you just got to learn more than once.
Yeah. Some lessons you learn twice.
Yeah. You totally have to learn it more than once. We're going to end up talking too much about shoes, but there's something about an interview or a first day that totally leads us to believe we need to like dress up or, pun intended, put a best foot forward. And I had another job in my late 20s where corporate job, really amazing job, wore a very comfortable outfit, but still wore these shoes that gave me blisters. And then the second day I had to wear sandals, like second day of my job, and be like, I hope these sandals are appropriate because I got really bad blisters on my first day.
Yeah, that first impression, like fear is, yep. I feel like I've done that too. I used to put like a full face of makeup on for the first week of a new job and then gradually like take one element of the makeup off because I realized I don't have that much time or energy in the morning to do a full face of makeup. And now I just don't wear makeup unless I'm taking photos for really fun things because I work from home. Myself.
Yes. And lucky for us, like so many people work from home and also shoes have gotten more comfortable. And also I think we have learned, or the listener will learn, that if you are yourself, like in an interview or in a first impression, that's the best thing you can do because, you need to be comfortable and be you for the rest of your time in that job too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Because otherwise you're putting on this persona that you then have to like subtly introduce parts of yourself so that people know who you really are and aren't surprised when you just like do something that's normal to you, but they didn't have that impression of you.
Mm-hmm. Give your whole self up front.
Yeah, exactly. So Nicole and I are also no longer in our 20s, for better or for worse. And I was thinking about this as I read through all of the lessons you've shared. Is there a part of your 20s that you feel like you'll miss? Like, for example, I used to be able to eat whatever I wanted, and I cannot do that now because I have like sensitivity to dairy and too much caffeine and things like that. But in my youthful days, I could just eat like a garbage truck.
I think that's a really fun question. I you guys are going to laugh at me also because I'll probably say this a bunch of times and my family laughs at me, but I'm always saying, oh, there's a lesson in the book about, and so I feel like that's my lead into a lot of things. But there's a lesson in the book specifically that reads, now and then you will miss being 21. And I think for me, it's actually like a more serious response. I also, now that I'm thinking about this, have a funny one totally in line with what you just asked. But the more serious one for me is that I actually like didn't miss this wild and busy social life that I had at 21, but I missed how everything was unknown to me at that age. Like I was this young businesswoman in my early 20s, and I was eager and naive. And like at the beginning of my career, I would often like imagine what work life might look like when I was 29. And now I've been 29 and I know what that looks like. And I guess it feels like there's still a lot of unknowns, but somehow the unknowns feel more focused or more narrow. Like the world just isn't quite so broad and wide open. And I think the second thing, which might be more like the example you mentioned, is that I miss the spontaneity of schedule. Like the opportunity and ability to stay out until 1 a.m. on a Monday night if you want to. I know Nicole knows this. I'm a mom now and I'm in my 30s, and there's so much joy in that, but it's a much more predictable and routine schedule. And, when I was in my 20s, if my roommate said like, hey, let's go out, and it was a Monday night, I could, and I would. And it's like, in your 20s, you master how to have a great time and still be great at your job and the other parts of your life. And I think, now it's like a big deal in some seasons of my life if I'm like simply out after the sun has set.
Yeah.
It's brutal to realize that. I think back to like I used to live in New York in my early 20s, and I would leave the office at 5:30 and like bop around the city and be home by 10 and be up until midnight and then go to work. And I like to be in bed with the lights out at 9:45 now. And if I stray from that, it takes me weeks to catch up.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just funny. I've always loved to sleep, and I've always prioritized sleep, but I really also, like I said, would try to, be a good roommate or a good coworker, and also just, try to act my age and have fun. And now really I'm like, oh, what a fun night. We were out and it's dark outside.
And now a word from our sponsor, Marina Kraus Writes. Guys, it's me. You know me from this podcast, but did you also know that I run a writing coaching business for people who want to write but don't know where to start? I solve the problem of getting started or getting finished by offering coaching, accountability, and community to anyone who wants to write. You might be working on a novel, a memoir, or just website copy, but I will help you find your voice and find your way. So check out my website at www.marinacrousewrites.com. That's MARINACROUSEWRITES.com, or follow me on Instagram at Marina Kraus Writes.
I know. I know. Whenever I have to drive at night, I'm like, oh, what a treat.
Yeah, what a treat.
Never leave after like 6 o'clock anymore. Yeah, I think that's definitely like just so true that like when you're in your young 20s, especially, there's like you have your whole 20-something decade in front of you. And like, yes, like there's nothing wrong with being 30 or older, like it's great. But it's just like having that like that youth and like not knowing what's going to happen yet. There's just something like really fun and special about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibility where I kind of see it as our 20s are for figuring things out and our 30s are for doing the things we figured out.
Yeah.
That's how it feels. At least for me, that's how it has felt in my first year of my 30s.
No, that's a really good way to say that. And I think maybe that was a more eloquent way of saying what I was saying when I feel like things are still unknown, but they're a little more focused or a little more narrow. Like to your point, you've figured out what you're doing, and now it's about doing it. And yeah, I mean, I think it's still fun, but sometimes I do miss that kind of unknown and uncertainty.
Yeah. It's kind of like a rose-colored glasses moment, where you're like, I don't know, maybe like we romanticize it a little bit now that we're older.
More mature.
But yeah. 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 I mean, other people need me to make them breakfast now, so, responsibility.
Michelle, is there a lesson in your book that you're surprised you learned but are glad you did?
Oh, what a good question. I think, I'm grateful for all of these lessons. I like truly the act of writing something down every day. It really changes how you approach the next day. And so, I mean it when I say I'm grateful for each of them. They've all like made my day more useful and made my life more productive. I think saying surprised is such a good question. So I think I'm most surprised about the things I've learned about love. When I started writing this book, I had the work chapter as like my very first chapter. And I felt like that was the most important and most defining part of my 20s. And that makes sense. I mean, I'm a really like career-driven, motivated person, but the love chapter was a little thin. And you guys have both seen the book. I think like there are a few less lessons in love, but I think it's a really meaningful chapter too. But what I think I'm most surprised about was that I learned to move for love. I think that's not something that I ever thought I would do. Like if you had told me in college that I would move for a romantic relationship, I would have laughed in your face. But at 26, I left a city I loved for someone I loved. And I think that surprised me the most. And maybe that I learned that it's not a weakness to do something like that, but it's actually a strength. And I felt like it was a gift to like feel a love like that was so strong that I'd uproot my current life for the potential of what might be in store for another life. And so the lesson in the book that I'm referring to truly says like move for love. And I that person ended up being my husband, and I realized that all situations like that won't end the same way, but I feel really confident that that God and the universe like recognize the act of sacrifice or the act of giving of yourself like that. And that, moving or like moving a location or just moving being that like you make a change or make a sacrifice. I think that, that puts other things and plans into motion that like couldn't happen otherwise. And as I'm talking and sharing this lesson, I'm thinking that there's at least 3 other lessons related to this idea that come up in the book. So clearly like it's changed the course of my own life. And so I'm particularly grateful for that one.
Oh, that is so sweet.
Yeah, that's really, that's, I feel like the lesson I learned is that like the one that I'm most surprised by is like similar in that I have a lot of anxiety and always have. And so I was very risk averse and tried so hard to like make a plan, follow a plan. And the biggest lesson I learned too many times was that it's okay to take risks and it's okay to deviate from the plan you thought you were going to do, because like joke's on you, the plan never turns out how you planned for. And it's kind of like, yeah, you're taking this risk to move out of your favorite city to pursue something greater, which is this like love and life you want to build with someone. It's like, yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It doesn't have to, I mean, it can be scary, but it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't doesn't say anything bad about you to try something new.
Yeah. I was reading something recently that said that your heart is your strongest muscle in your body and you should listen to it. And I love that. I think because I find myself to be a more like intuitive feelings person versus like a what makes sense kind of person, So I love that. That was like a really surprising lesson for you, because I think it's a very important lesson because I'm very heart driven. That's how I describe myself. So I love that.
Yeah. Something that just came to mind when you were talking about the plans piece, Marina, is I also one day wrote down, like, as you grow, adjust your fairy tale.
Ooh, I love that.
And I think that was something that I had to do in this particular situation, but also so many other times. Like, it's like you have this, similar to what we were saying before about who we imagined ourselves as in our early 20s. I had it all outlined. Like, I was in advertising. I was going to move up in my career. This is where I was going to be. And it's like, then this event happened, or this person happened that changed my plans. And I, like I said, it surprised me then, and it still surprises me in that I really didn't think that that's how my story would go, but it kind of changed my story. And I think that's what we have to realize, is that whenever we make certain decisions, it kind of changes the next set of options from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know what that makes me think of, Michelle? If I think about who I thought I was going to be when I was 30, back when I was 22, hilarious, for one. I'm not her, but I like myself so much more than I could have ever imagined I'd become, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
what I'm doing now, I couldn't dream up, because my world was still so small, I guess. I hadn't lived enough. And now at 30, I'm like, wow, I am doing things I could only have like read about or dreamed of, let alone like believed I could do. And so it's like, hey, it worked out even better than I planned. So go try it.
Yeah. That's so good.
So we think a lot about the lessons we've learned and the advice people who've been in our shoes before us have given us. What do you think the worst piece of advice you've ever received about or while you were in your 20s was? Because I have thoughts.
I know. I'll be so interested to hear. Everyone has to go around and answer this question. What a funny thing. What's the worst advice you've ever received? So specific to your 20s, I think mine is about work. I had someone advise that it would look bad if I changed jobs too many times in my 20s.
Yes.
That it would seem like
that
it would seem like I bounced around too much, or like I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I actually couldn't disagree more with that advice or opinion. I think your 20s is really a time to try a variety of different jobs or career paths, like in order to figure out the best one for you. And I think it's a time like of fewer obligations or costs or people to worry about. And it's just like really fun to explore as many opportunities as you can. And I also think on a resume that the mention of several different jobs, or even the mention of a job that you only stayed at for 6 months, like allows you the opportunity to tell people about your priorities or why something was or wasn't a good fit for you. And so I think it just makes a lot more sense to kind of take the chances while you're young and while you can, and not worry about something like that. So I think that was long-winded, but that's probably the worst advice I received, was that it would look bad if I changed jobs too many times.
Yeah, I have definitely heard that one. And I completely agree with your outtake and your adjusted advice, because I think that advice is so outdated, and careers don't look like what they used to. And so you have to move. You have to move around. And it's okay to say, like, I was in a job, I can always forget about this. When I was in grad school, I had an internship. I got let go because the company got bought. And then I got rehired a couple months later as a full-time employee while I was doing grad school full-time. And it was not like I got there the first week, and it was like not the story I was sold. And so after a month, I realized this is a terrible job. This is not what I was expecting. I can't do this, and I'm going to prioritize the education I'm getting for the career I want versus this like hourly wage job that I was hoping would be better. And so I left, and I remember telling my parents, because they were always, like very practical, and they were, I think, surprised, but they supported me, and that surprised me, because I thought I had to do everything a certain way. And so I think the worst advice I ever got, I swear this connects. The worst advice I ever got was that you need to say yes to everything. And I was given that in like a career center in college talk. And it was like, say yes to everything that'll get you ahead. You'll be considered a team player, all these things. And really, it just got me burnout because I was walked all over. Everyone knew, oh, Marina will say yes to anything. She's a team player. And it's like, I need to say no for things that don't help me. Like, I can't say yes to something that will hurt me because I'm not getting enough sleep or because I don't believe the value of what it's doing. Like that job where I was just like, this isn't, I can get another like hourly job that is less stressful. So I'm not going to stay here and burn myself out just because I said yes to it. I should have said no. So that's the worst advice I ever got.
Yeah, I can relate to that one for sure. I was in a job for about 3 months and I felt the same way, that it was kind of not the story I had been sold. Like, that's so well put. And so I left that job, but I also still would include that job on my resume because I felt like it was a really good opportunity to tell people like why it wasn't a good fit for me and what was important to me. So I feel that one for sure. Nicole, I want to hear your response to this worst advice question.
So I've been sitting here thinking about it, and I think it's probably similar to what you both have said, like sort of echoes where it's like everyone needs to follow like a certain path to, you know, do X, Y, and Z, like whether it's like with your job or whatever. But I have always been the risk taker, the do things differently kind of person. So I never really listened to that advice. I just kind of, I mean, I started my own business, you know, letting people talk about the experiences in their 20s. That was my business. And I mean, it still is my business. But it's like, I don't know. I think that whenever people tell me I should do something one way, I'm like, no, I'm going to do it the other way and like learn my own, like, you know, my own path, my own likes and dislikes, and not really let people tell me what I am and are not going to do. I don't know. So I feel like that's like the worst advice that I got that I'm glad that I didn't listen to.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I'm glad you didn't listen either because you're the reason I'm a better risk taker. So go team.
Oh. Yeah, that's the whole reason we have this podcast, actually. Because there would be no Gen 20 podcast if there wasn't a Gen 20.
That's true.
I'm so glad you took that risk.
You know, I mean, was it really that risky? No.
Well,
but here we are.
I pitched this podcast idea to you a year before we actually sat down to do it.
Yeah, so I had just had a baby, so we have to keep that in mind in the timeline.
But I think we assessed the risk ahead of time. And then when the pandemic happened, we were like, yeah, this is the best time to do it. Let's talk. So, but yeah, I think a lot of the advice we get that doesn't fit comes from people who aren't quite suited to give us guidance because they are so far removed from the current situation. So like, I've been thinking about this. What do you think the biggest divide or gap is between people in their 20s now and when we were in our 20s? And like maybe when our parents were in our 20s? Because as we mentioned before, like when we were in our early 20s, we were getting career advice from our parents who like were in their maybe 50s and they're very far removed from their 20s. So they're especially their career advice wasn't always practical.
Yeah, I feel, Marina, that you touched on this a little bit earlier when you talked about the access to social media. And I feel like my short answer to this question is like access and exposure. And if you think about it, like we were in our 20s when we created, or I was in my 20s when I created my Instagram account. And people in their 20s now have had this access and exposure, and in some cases, like an overconsumption of content since they were teens or maybe even earlier. And so I feel like it's just maybe even easier for them to like lose sight of who they are as an individual because they're constantly comparing themselves to others or moving their own marker for success, like based on the achievement or perceived achievement of someone else.
And yeah, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that we had an interview a few weeks ago that came out with Tess Brigham, and she was talking about how, like, for people in their 20s now, they don't like have a real memory of a time where they didn't have access to like social media and like all this constant content consumption. Whereas like we made our Instagram accounts like in our 20s. Like when we were teenagers, like this didn't really exist. And so we're kind of like straddling the line where it's like we've sort of lived in like both times, right? And because like I feel like when we were in our 20s, like there was all that stuff where people are like, oh, like we're not hiring this person because they put this on Facebook or something. And like,
Yeah,
is that
they have
now?
tattoos. It's like, okay.
Yeah, like is that a thing now? I don't know. Do people still talk about that?
You know, this will be like a moment where we're all 30 somethings and we talk about the internet, but
Back in my day.
yeah, I've kind of always seen, you know, you asked the gap or the divide. I've always seen this pretty clear divide between like our parents knew when we were on the internet, like you had to ask to use the phone line or like they heard the dial up. And and then there's this other generation where like you could just get online and no one knew you were online. And I feel like that's a really defining difference or characteristic. And I also laugh because like I didn't have a cell phone and, you know, we had caller ID. And so my brother and my dad would know like when a boy was calling me. And I feel like there's just kind of this whole different experience from youth onward around like access and exposure to the internet. And it's just kind of funny, like to say it another way. I was an advertising major in college and I had an elective course that was called digital media. Like it was just one elective and the textbook was from the early 2000s and it was honestly called like advertising on the internet.
So good.
And now, you know, you can full on major in and work in social media. And like I said before, I just feel like that's kind of the gap or divide between our 20s and the current 20s is again, just like the access and the exposure and just how that leads you to like perceive yourself. And I think what I really want, you know, kind of my message for today's 20 something is that I really want them to know themselves. Like I learned my own voice through journaling and I learned like not only how to recognize it, but how to like when to trust it and not to trust it. And so I think, you know, just knowing yourself is the best way to get where you want to go. And it's just so important to stay true to who you are and not get caught up in, again, kind of this like comparison or moving your own marker based on someone else's success.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one thing I want to touch upon before we finish talking is that your book also includes space for the reader to work through their thoughts and ask themselves questions. And I think that's so important that you've included, like it's like turns into almost a workbook at a point. And I know that people are going to love that because your book shares experiential and actionable advice already. And so I know that everyone's going to learn so much from it and in turn better know themselves.
Yeah. And I think that was important to me. Like I said before, when I realized that it was important that I show everyone how I learned, I felt like then it was really important to give everyone the space to like notice their own life experience and to really take the time and the moment to recognize that they already possess an extreme amount of wisdom too. And so at the end of each chapter, there are lessons that include prompts for the reader. And my hope is really that, you know, these prompts can kind of help spark a thought. And like I said, this realization that you possess a lot of wisdom, but then also maybe can inspire someone else to really take notice of what's going on in their own lives and start to record the lessons that are happening to them.
I love that. So Michelle, I know people are going to want to purchase your book and follow you. So when is this available? Where can people connect?
So the book is officially out into the world as of April 5th, and it's available wherever you buy your books. So you can ask for it at your favorite indie bookstore, or it's also available at like Amazon, Target, and Barnes & Noble. And then your listeners can find me online at fieldguidefor20s.com. And similarly on Instagram, I'm at fieldguidefor20s. For both of those, it's the written word, not the number. And I would just absolutely love to connect and answer any questions. I share a lot of my lessons via Instagram and on a blog, but I'm also always happy to share them by message or chat. So I'll look forward to anybody joining me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you on to talk about your book and all the lessons that you learned. And I think this was like such a valuable conversation, and I really hope that people will join us on Instagram and join you on Instagram to talk more about it. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. This was such a fun chat.
All right, so this has been another episode of the Gen 20 podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and buy Michelle's book. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.